Two-point row with scap movement. The reason I'm calling this a two-point row is because we're going to have 2 points of contact with our bench or box or whatever we're using. So we want to make sure in our setup that we get really nice and over, again, that mid foot that we always kind of talk about here. What I don't want is for you to be really far back or really far forward. So if I get way more forward, this is really going to tend to put a little more strain kind of in that low back to be in this position right here. And if I'm really far back, then I'm going to tend to kind of like tuck under here. And we really don't want either one of those. So right in the center is that really nice sweet spot where we want to be. So an important thing to remember about this 2-point position is that I still want you to get those ribs down to find some support from your deep core, bottom up, but without tucking this under, okay? So we don't need to tuck this under. We, again, are just thinking about gently lifting our tailbone, having that little tiny twerk, but we wanna keep the ribs down. The other thing we don't wanna do here is drop our chest down when we go to pick up our weight. So you can see here how my shoulders traveled forward, my whole chest kind of caved in as I'm moving down. So we don't wanna do that. So just make sure in your setup that you feel really nice and solid, and you want to keep that setup position throughout the exercise. All right, so the next thing we want to think about here is the angle of our pull. The angle of our pull is not going to be straight up, okay? When we come straight up, we tend to move the whole shoulder joint a little bit, and we don't really need to move this whole shoulder joint. We want the shoulder to stay relatively stable, and we are going to pull back at an angle. I really like to think about wrist to waist, and you don't need to bring your arm as high as what you may think you need to. So ideally, we actually don't need to bring our wrist all the way to our waist. Many times when we bring the wrist all the way to our waist, it's going to result in just that whole shoulder joint kind of moving up and forward. So I only want you to go to the range that you own, and the range that you own is the range in which you can really just kind of keep this space right here between your shoulder and your chest really nice and open, okay? That's the range that you own. So just go to whatever range you own. Now, thinking about, again, keeping that space nice and open, you're going to pull back at an angle right here. And you're going to come up and then back down. The last little thing to keep in mind here is your support arm. Do your very best not to lock out your support arm. We don't want to be relying on our joints over here, so just tiny bend is fine. It doesn't need to be like bent, but we don't want to be totally locked out. Now, the scap movement part of this exercise happens mostly at the bottom, okay? So you can look at the difference between me ending right here and here. Do you see how here my shoulder didn't come up? That's not what I did. My shoulder doesn't move from bottom to top. It's my scap that is moving from closer to my spine to further away from my spine. So I'm just letting that scap kind of come around my rib cage, which means that your serratus anterior is just lengthening a bit, and then we're going to pull the scap back towards the spine. Okay, so that's what we're doing. At the bottom of our row, we're here, so we'll say this is more neutral. We're just letting that scap come around the rib cage, not up, okay, just down, and then we're going to pull back to neutral and then start the row from there. So it just adds a little bit more of goodness. We're eccentrically lengthening the serratus anterior because we have load, and we just get a little bit more of the TLC for the shoulder that sometimes we don't get because we don't let our scap come around. A lot of times as climbers, we're just vertically pulling all the time. So this just gives us a really nice way to put a little extra goodness into an exercise that is really amazing in the first place. All right, that is your 2-point row with scap movement.